is billed as an advanced text class with advanced topics and advanced Judaic texts. That's my world famous cough. And although the Megillah itself is not an advanced text, it's part of the standard curriculum, let's say, and we read it every year at Purim time. We're studying it with Midrash and with additional Torah texts to bring it to a higher level. And we've already had our first 2 classes, and this is class number 3 on it. And before I go straight into the Megillah itself, I want to start off just a little bit. Let me pull this up. Let me pull up the Megillah. I use Sefaria because I found from among all the online, even though they have, Sefaria uses just about the worst imaginable translation that has so many mistakes. Nevertheless, it's really the best for online teaching. And I've asked my colleagues, and they all agree it's the translation is horrific. It's almost like a separate language, but it's great. The Hebrew is reliable, and the English is 80% good or 90% good. Anyway, we've already covered chapter 1 in depth, and yet there's more I want to plumb out of chapter 1 as we move on to chapter 2. Here we go. Achashverosh. Just a very quick reminder or refresher for those who missed either of the first 2 classes. And I'm always balancing not wanting to waste your valuable, precious morning time by just saying the same stuff again, while sometimes there's foundational stuff that's good for you to hear a second time and for newcomers to hear the first time. So a very quicker version of the first 2 is a reminder. Megillah is different from a lot of the books in that it had to get through censorship. There are 24 books in the Torah and the Tanakh, the Bible. The word Tanakh itself is 3 words, the acrostic or initials of Torah, Nevi'im, Ketuvim, the 5 books of the Torah, the books of the prophets, such as Jeremiah, Ezekiel, Isaiah, as well as books like Joshua, Judges, Samuel, and Kings. And Ketuvim are the books like Song of Songs, Psalms, things like that. Tanakh is the Bible. We believe the first 5 books actually the Word of God, every single letter, that God literally dictated the 5 books of Breshit, Shemot, Vayikra, Bamidbar, Devarim, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy, directly to Moses, Moshe Rabbeinu, and that he took it all down as dictation, truly as a stenographer, and that he did not write a single word or letter on his own. We believe all those 5 books literally are the Word of God. That is why if there's a single letter missing, cracked, broken during the Torah reading in shul, we wrap up the Torah scroll, take out another one, because the Torah must be 100% accurate, the Word of God. Then we believe the other books of the Nevi'im primarily were written by our holiest of people, of generations, who are writing under divine inspiration. Not that God dictated, but that, for example, Joshua, when he wrote his book of Joshua, or Samuel, Shmuel, when he wrote the books of Shoftim, we believe Shmuel wrote the books of Shoftim, Shmuel Aleph and Shmuel Bet, First Samuel and Judges, and we believe he wrote under divine inspiration. We believe the 2 books of Kings, First and Second Kings, Melachim Aleph and Bet, were written by Jeremiah, Yirmiyahu, who also wrote the books of Yirmiyahu, Eicha, Lamentations that we read on Tisha B'Av. He wrote in divine inspiration, and so on and so forth, Isaiah, Ezekiel, yada, yada. Esther was therefore written, we believe, under divine inspiration. But unlike the others, it had to get through censorship. Since it's the Tanakh, the Bible, there's no falsehood in it to get through censorship. But a text had to be written in a very careful way so that it could convey truth, accuracy, that the king and his censors would not notice. As a classic example, it does not say that the king could not hold his wine, that the king was was very, very prone to tipsiness. Instead, you pick it up from the text. Every time he's drinking wine, next thing you know, he's ordering someone to be executed. Likewise, it does not say that when he got drunk, he ordered that his wife Vashti be brought in naked, because that would make him, once he's sobered up and his censors read it, it does not make him look very good. So instead of saying that he ordered her to be brought in naked, it says that he ordered her to be brought in wearing a crown. It is understood that as the queen, she always wore the crown. Why does it say that he ordered her to be brought in wearing the crown? The implication is that's all she should be wearing and nothing else, that he wanted her naked, and so on and so forth. That anything that is very strong, like the ordering of Haman to be killed, that's explicit in the text. That makes him look like a good guy. But the fact that he was more wicked, more evil than Haman, that's kept out of the text. That makes him look like a bad guy. So it happens to be, according to the Talmud, he was worse than anyone. He was worse than Haman. And yet we don't say it in the text. That's our secret. It got through the censors. So on the one hand, Vayihi b'mei Achashverosh, it speaks in the beginning about King Achashverosh. In English, the King James Version, a Middle Ages English translation that was financed and ordered by King James, and that carries its own mistakes, and that transliterates names instead of just spelling them out the way they're pronounced. So it talks about who Achashverosh. You just said it was the king, it was in the days of Achashverosh, Ahasuerus. Who Achashverosh? That Ahasuerus. We normally believe that the Tanakh keeps an economy of words and does not unnecessarily add words just to throw in more words. So we therefore often learn out from the presence of duplicative words, there might be something there. Why, if it says, these are the days of Achashverosh, that Achashverosh? And the Gemara tells us in pages, Megillah now remind you, there are a certain number of tractates in the Talmud, one of which is Tractate Megillah, Mesekhet Megillah. Among the tractates of the Talmud, there are several tractates dealing particularly with holidays. Let's take a look, just a refresher real quick. We have Shabbat in Seder Moed, the section, one of the 6 sections of the Talmud. There are, oh, by the way, we don't want to donate to Sefaria. If we thought they would use it on an English translation, but we'll take that down a little later. In fact, we'll take it down now because we really don't want to donate to Sefaria. Get off my page. Nope, you won't let me. All right, continuing. So, there's in Seder Moed, one of the 6 sections of the Talmud. There is the tractate Laws of Shabbat, Laws of Passover, Pesachim. Laws of Yoma is primarily Yom Kippur. Beitzah is laws about cooking on the holidays, particularly the holy days, the first and last of the longer ones. Megillah is about Purim. Chagiga regards a particular sacrifice that was offered particularly on the festivals. Sukkah is about Sukkot. Moed Katan covers the laws of Chol HaMoed, those middle days of Passover and Sukkot, which are week-long holidays, 7 days in Israel, 8 days outside. Well, the first and last days are holy, and the middle days are Moed Katan. Katan means small, Moed means holiday, minor holiday. Ta'anit are the laws of fasting, and there's also Rosh Hashanah. Where did it go? There it is. Rosh Hashanah covering both the Rosh Hashanah you know, and the other New Year's, like the New Year of Trees on Tu B'Shvat, etc. So that covers pretty much all the holidays. Eruvin, building an Eruv so you can carry on Shabbat. And it covers basically all the holidays, but they don't have a special one for Hanukkah because Hanukkah has so little in Judaism. Although in Christian society, Jews have made Hanukkah into an Adam Sandler festival to be equated with Christmas. since Christmas is so central to everything you experience as a Jew in Galut in the exile, the way that starting in October, they start playing the little drummer boy at the mall, and that everything is a Christmas sale. And they've got Christmas sales running from mid-October through the first week in January. So it's so overwhelmingly predominant that Jewish parents feeling bad about depriving their kids try to make Hanukkah into what it isn't, namely into 8 days of gifts and the biggest thing since sliced matzah. But the reality is that Hanukkah is like a nothing from nothing, other than one very important miracle that happened to the Beit HaMikdash. So I'm being a bit glib when I say nothing from nothing, gornished mit gornished, GMG. But on the other hand, for those of you that have seen Srugim, but on the other hand, it doesn't have enough to merit its own Talmudic tractate. Megillah, on the other hand, has a bunch. There's the 4 mitzvahs, each of which needs some discussion. The mitzvah to hear the reading of the Megillah, the mitzvah of giving charity to the poor, the mitzvah of eating a special feast on Purim Day, and the mitzvah of giving shalach manos, mishloach manot ishlareyehu, food gifts one to another, plus the whole storyline, which is far more complex, 10 chapters worth as compared to Hanukkah. Okay, so we're here in Megillah, and I'm going to not start from, let's say, page 2, which is every Talmudic tractate starts on page 2. There is no page 1 in the Talmud. Someone tells you I'm about to study or I'm studying Talmud, I'm on page 1b, means they're full of baloney. Anyway, I'm going to skip, it's about page 11, where the discussion actually gets into the Megillah. The first 10 pages discuss a bunch of other stuff. It's only about page 11, so let me jump into page 11. It'll be quicker than scrolling it. And let's get ourselves to Esther. Esther. And so let's find Esther. There we are, Megillah. Okay, Megillah 11. Okay, so they start talking about the very nature of the name Achashverosh and what is hidden in that name. And in the name Achashverosh, they point out that he's a Rasha and he was an evil man. Achashverosh. In the Talmud, this is page 11a of Megillah. Every page of the Talmud is numbered either side A or side B, and many of us do not even call it page, but folio, Folio. Omar Rav Achiv Shorosh. He was equivalent to Achashverosh, brother of Rosh, head. He was equivalent to the brother. He was like a brother in evil with the head. What head? Nebuchadnezzar the evil. There was no one more evil in certain ways than Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylonia, who led the destruction of the first Beit HaMikdash under Babylonia, 586 before the Common Era. He, to refresh your memory, from the document that I put online, our first class, the historic monarchies were, after the death of Nebuchadnezzar, the Babylonian king was succeeded by his son, Evil Merodach, who reigned very, very briefly, and was succeeded by Belshazzar. Some say Belshazzar was the brother of Evil Merodach. Some say he was the son. And that's where the dynasty of the Babylonians ends, on the infamous night of chapter 5 in the book of Daniel that we studied together here 2 weeks ago, when he celebrated his kingship with a big party that included pulling out vessels from the Beit HaMikdash that his father or grandfather, Nebuchadnezzar, had stolen from the Beit HaMikdash when they plundered it. As he was drinking from the vessels of the Beit HaMikdash, a nondescript hand, like a hologram, started writing on the wall. The famous expression, the writing on the wall, stems from the book of Daniel, chapter 5, verse 2, where the words Menei Menei, Tekel Ufarsin were written. Aramaic words meaning you've been numbered, they've been weighed, and you have been divided. Daniel explained that because at that particular celebration, King Belshazzar was drinking from a silver vessel from the Beit HaMikdash, he would die that night, and his kingdom would be divided. He did die that night. He was assassinated. And the next day, Persia took over the empire from Babylonia under King Koresh, Cyrus. Cyrus allowed the Jews to return to Eretz Israel from Babylonia after a 70-year exile. We began to start to build the Beit HaMikdash. There was, first Darius I, and then Cyrus of Persia. So Darius I, then Cyrus of Persia, and then came Achashverosh. And Achashverosh, was on his watch. First Cyrus started receiving notes from Samaritans who lived in Judea, Samaria, saying, you better stop the Jews from building the Beit HaMikdash because they're in the process of doing so under your permission, and they're going to rebel against your empire. So you better stop them while you have time. And Cyrus did put out the skids to stop. Achashverosh completely put a ban on any continuation of building the Beit HaMikdash. It was only after his death that, of all people, his son Darius II, Daryevich Hasheni, the son of Achashverosh and Esther, hence a Jewish boy, although the Persians didn't realize it, he allowed the rebuilding of the Beit HaMikdash. So he's Achiv Shel Nebuchadnezzar. He actually is the head, he's the brother and head. Also, the rabbi known as Shmuel says his name was Achashverosh, Hushcharu Pneihem Shel Yisrael. He made the Jews, basically turned us into like black kettles. We would treat it on the bottom. Hu Achashverosh, hu Berisho mitachilato v'ad sofo. He was evil from the top to the bottom. He was like Esau, the twin brother of Yaakov, who together were the sons of Yitzchak and Rivka. He was the worst of the worst. So why is the text so nice about him? Again, because it had to get through censors. So they made him sound like a nice guy, but he was evil. And it's important for us to understand in the context of the story. We then talked about how he holds a celebration for 6 months and a week. Important footnote to what I've taught earlier. The first 6 months, it was a 6-month national celebration, international celebration for his full 127 provinces. They all were invited to Shushan, the capital, to celebrate in his royal area of palace. The royal palace was made up of 3 zones. There was the palace itself, the building, compared to the White House. Then there was the Bitan, or Ginat Habitan. There were the royal gardens just outside the palace. Compare it to the Rose Garden, where special events take place with the President of the United States. I remember when Trump got his nomination to be the candidate for the Republicans against Biden, Trump made the final celebration of his nomination on the White House grounds. And you even had that opera singer who was singing on the balcony of the White House for the people who were gathered not in the White House, but right outside on the lawn. So you have the Bitan, and then you have the Chatzer, which is the larger, greater grounds, let's say, of the White House. That, like when somebody tries to break into the White House to kill the president, and the Secret Service, captures the guy on the gate, or they just get on the other side of the gate when they get shot. So when you just get on the other side of the gate, you're on the expansive, expanded grounds of the White House. You haven't yet reached, let's say, the East Lawn or the Rose Garden. And then inside is the building itself. That's for those of you, for example, who've taken tours of the White House and you've been in the White House. So everybody from the 127 provinces was invited onto the expanded grounds. And for 6 months that went on, and they probably ripped up the place. Although because it was a dictatorship with instant executions, they probably didn't do it too bad. But on the other hand, you're stamping, you got all these people. Then the people from the city of Shushan were permitted, especially in the last week of the 180 days, to visit the Rose Garden, the East Lawn, to really get into the famous areas really close to the palace. But he did not have everyone from the city of Shushan in the palace. And then that last week, he had his highest ranking people, his cabinet members, their wives, yada, yada, celebrating inside the palace itself. It is considered an historic, what I call the thumbprint of God. I use that expression. When God does a miracle, and it's not 1,000,000% clear it's a miracle, but he leaves like a thumbprint that Sherlock Holmes would be able to spot later while powdering the walls. How do you know it's a miracle? Something weird takes place. There's the obvious miracles like the splitting of the Red Sea. But then well, for that matter, you wake up and the whole country's filled with frogs. And you know they're not traveling from France because they're banning trips during COVID. So where are all these frogs coming from? You open up the oven and you open up the stove and you find in your pillowcase everywhere, it's like a Budweiser-like commercial, ribbit, ribbit. So that's like overt manifest miracles. Then there are the thumbprint of God miracles that seem like everyday events, but there's something. And the thumbprint of God takes place here, that there's a massive national 187-day event, 6 months and 1 week, and the miracle takes place the last day. He had 186 days to say to his wife, show yourself naked, and he only does it the very last day. What was he waiting for 6 months and a week? He was waiting for everything you would wait for. You don't ask your wife to show up naked in front of people, unless you're at a nudist colony, in which case it's no surprise she's already naked. So what's this deal that he's only showing up with this crazy idea in the very last hours of the very last day? God has set this up as a unique miracle, setting in motion the process by which Esther and the Jewish people will have access to save the Jewish people. Okay, so we come back to our Mesekhet story. And I'm, again, not going to repeat so very much of what we've learned already, only the new stuff. Chel Parashah Madai, reminding you that by now, Persia and Media are the ones who have divided, as per the prophecy on the writing of the wall, that your kingdom will be divided. Of course, Menemedei Tekel Upharsin, Upharsin it will be divided. It is divided between Paras, which literally means in Aramaic divided, and Madai, Media. Some spell Media like media, like the English word media. Many spell it Medea. Doesn't matter, that's not its language anyhow. Parashah Madai. So he's got half of his cabinet are Persians, half are Medians. It's a little bit like the modern day Lebanon. Modern day Lebanon is a real pathetic situation. If you follow the news out of Lebanon, and there's no reason for you to do it, I do it for you. It's included in your membership dues. So Lebanon is basically a mess. It's made up of Muslims, of Shiites and Sunni Muslims who kill each other. In fact, the way that you know, how do you know it's going to be Pesach? Pesach is coming. How do you know Pesach is coming? Because a month in advance, when you go to Ralph's and Albertsons, you suddenly see they move the matzah from aisle 9 up to the front. And they're suddenly offering stuff that Jews eat, like prune butter, the stuff from the kosher aisle. And suddenly you're finding shav and other inedible things in the front. So that means Passover's coming. John Fischer, no relationship, the non-Jew to whom I sell the chametz every year, he'll call me every year to tell me, Rabbi, I don't know whether you know it, but Passover is right around the corner. And I'll always thank John for letting me know. And how does he know? Because he sees the Manischewitz matzahs in the front at Ralph's. So that's how we know when a holiday is coming. How do you know when a Muslim holiday is coming? Ramadan. After all, Ramadan's a different time every year, as we've learned in the past, because they don't add a month to their lunar calendar, so it gets out of sync from the seasons. The way you know, I hate to say it, is that when you start reading about mosques getting blown up. Jews do not blow up mosques. Christians don't blow up mosques. Muslims blow up mosques. So what ends up happening is the Shiites and the Sunnis start, when Ramadan is coming in to celebrate the Chag, a week or two in advance, they start blowing up mosques in Afghanistan and Lebanon. Lebanon is completely out of control. It's Sunnis and it's Shiites. It's a fight they've got going on regarding whether a particular guy happened to be the Messiah 1,500 years ago, or the herald of the Messiah, who did not actualize his full possibility. So the Shiites say yeah, and the Sunnis say no, and this is how they work it out. So Iraq is Shiite, and Iran is Shiite, and Saudi Arabia, Kuwait, a lot of the sheikdoms are Sunni, and they kill each other. Okay, they hate it. They really do. They kill each other. That's why it's important for us to know, even if we cannot convince most of the college kids who support the BDS, the reality is that if there were no Israel, Israel is not a destabilizing force in the Middle East. For those that want to say, if there were no Israel, it would be peace and hunky-dory out there. Actually, if there were no Israel, they'd be killing themselves every day of the week. Their common hatred for Israel, except for the recent Abraham Accords that have finally taken a few of these countries out of the line of fire. But actually, without Israel, you have an Iraq-Iran war, for those of you old enough to remember how for 7 years they killed each other all the time. Okay. So in Lebanon, in order to calm things down between the Shiites and the Sunnis, they actually have a shared political arrangement that their cabinet is made up by law, by constitution, of a certain number of Shiites and a certain number of Sunnis. It's a power sharing. And that way they avoid a civil war. Meantime, which they still will end up having, because they always end up having. Likewise, they throw in a Christian or two or three, the so-called Maronite Christians. And unfortunately, they're called Maronite Christians, but in the back of the minds of the Sunnis and the Shiites, they think of them as marinated Christians. Believe me, that's where they're going, marinated. Anyway, so the cabinet of Ahasuerus is split equal amount of Persians and Medians, and they're sitting there and they're experiencing the glories for 180 days. 180 days. That's 6 months. Okay. And when the 180 days is up, he goes ahead and he has a 7-day additional one in the garden for the ones who are local, an additional 7 days. Okay. And it describes the glory. We've gone through it in the past. Here's the thing. He is a dati. Let me explain. Ahasuerus, you may know the Hebrew word dot. There's da'at with an ayin in between, and there's dot. Da'at means knowledge. Dea. The Chabad, the Lubavitcher Hasidic group, Chabad is made up of the initials of 3 words. Chachma bina da'at. Let me see whether I can quickly get it on the screen for you. If it takes me more than a moment, I won't even waste your time. But for the first moment, it's not really wasting time. Let's see if I can get it on that whiteboard. Chabad. So the letters Chabad, the chet there's chet, and then there's B. I'll do it in Assyrian. And then there's D. Okay. So in Hebrew, Lubavitch call themselves Chabad. Give it a dot. Okay. Give it a bigger dot. There we go. So Chabad. And Chabad stands for Chachma, like a Chacham. And don't make fun of this. It's not easy to write in any language on this thing, but it sure beats getting poked in the eye with a screwdriver. So you got Chachma or a Chacham. You got Bina. In fact, Rabbi T's wife, her name, I think, is Bini, which is a nickname for Bina. Chachma means smarts. Bina means wisdom. And then Da'at means knowledge. Okay. So you got Chabad. Chabad is the Roshei Teva, the initials of Chabad. Okay. And of those three, that's the word Da'at, knowledge. And knowledge should not be mistaken with a Hebrew word that sounds very similar, dot. And dot does not have that ayin in the middle. There's dot with an ayin in the middle. There's dot. In Hebrew, the religious in Israel are called the datis or the datiim. Dot means law. So Orthodox in Hebrew is the datiim, namely the ones who follow the law of kosher, the law of Shabbat. Okay, dot means law. So Achashverosh actually, even though he's going to have his wife killed and other not so nice stuff, is dati. He's very law focused. I want you to notice this. It says that the drinking at his party was religious based. We'll come back to that in a moment. When he wants to punish his wife Vashti for refusing to show up naked, as Queen Vashti refused to come at his command, what he did was, he doesn't simply execute her, kill her, rather he consults with his advisors, all of whom are present at the table because they're there for the last week. The cabinet members are at his dais at the inside the palace, and he consults with them. What's the law? What is the law? That's that word dot again. He consults with the people who know the law. What is the law that I can apply for the wife failing to obey the king's command? He is very law conscious. That becomes very important because later on, what's going to happen, for those of you that have been through the annual readings and know this story, so what's going to happen eventually is that Mordechai is going to tell Queen Esther that a death sentence has been handed out against the Jews, and you have to go, and you have to go to the king to save our lives. And she's going to say, I can't do it because everyone knows the king has a law. And the law is that you're not allowed to show up in the presence of the king unless he first calls for you. And notice how she says it. She uses the words, again, she talks about law. So let's just find it really, really fast. All right, first, the king gives Haman what he wants. Lihi noten dot. Again, that word dot. I'll make a law that allows you to kill all the Jews. Now, Mordechai says, you have to speak to the king. And she says, the problem is, everywhere where the king's law extends, it is known you can't just go to the king without his permission. And so if I go without permission, I'm going to be a dead woman. Asher lo yikore achat dato lahamit. That's the law. Again, the word dot. Anyone who shows up without the king, first calling, unless he extends his golden scepter, I'm dead meat. And so she asks that everybody should please pray for me and fast for me. And then whatever will happen, and I'll take my chances, she says. But again, she's quite well aware that she's at the mercy of the law. And in one more place, I bring it out to you that when he has Haman killed, and now Esther and Mordechai say, we have a problem because you are a man of law. You don't bend in the face of law. There was a law that Esther wasn't allowed to come unless you extend your scepter. Thank God you extended your scepter. There's the law this, there's the law that. Even to kill Vashti, you didn't do it unless your advisors told you that there's a law that allows it. So we have a problem here because you had passed a law under the importuning of Haman that all the Jews should be killed on the 13th of Adar. And that's a bad law. And we need you to announce the nullification of your law. And he responds, I can't do that because there's another law. And under that law, it's a law that any promulgation of the king cannot be undone, cannot be nullified. That's just the law. And so the law's on the books that on that day, all anti-Semites have a free holiday to kill Jews, take their property, and kill the wives and kids also. And so the question becomes, what are we going to do about this very bad law if you have a law that says you cannot nullify a law? And he says, well, here's what I can do under the law. I can issue a second law, a second promulgation that says all the Jews can kill the anti-Semites and take their property and kill their wives and kids. A parallel law. I can give you the same exact day on the books, the anti-Semites may kill the Jews, take their property, murder their wives and kids, and the Jews may kill all the anti-Semites, take their property and wives and kids. And so on the one hand, Ketav asher nirtav b'shem hamelech v'nachtom b'davar hamelech ein lahashiv. Any writing that is in the king's name with the king's seal, that's like if you ever saw the Disney movie, The Prince and the Pauper, how they're looking for the king's seal. Any edict that's been written with the seal of the king, seal that may not be revoked. That's the law. But what I can do is I can do that contradictory law. And then with two laws on the books, one of which permits the Jews to assemble, fight, and to go ahead and exterminate their enemies together with women and children and plunder the possessions. So now that you have the two, what I can do is you got the two laws on the books, and then I can put out the word to the police and to the army, you are to implement the law that allows the Jews to kill the enemies and do not implement the other law. And as you know from Fiddler on the Roof, the night of the wedding of Mutal Kamsoil the tailor, and Tevye has made such the best provisions and the best wedding they can come up with, together with Goldie, and that's the night that Mutal's getting married, and suddenly the commander of the police shows up with pogromists and apologizes to Tevye, but explains, what can I do? Tonight's a pogrom. I told you to be a pogrom. I didn't want it to be on your wedding night. I'll try to keep it short and sweet. And they rip up the wedding to pieces, you may remember. And then there's a certain point where the commander stops his pogromists. Okay, that's enough. In other words, we destroy the wedding, but I like Tevye, so we're not going to kill any Jews. And in the same way, what he's doing is the king, is he's saying, on the one hand, I will have the police and the army enforce my ban, my promulgation that the Jews may kill out all their enemies, yada, yada, yada. And I will likewise give them the word, you better not enforce the previous promulgation, or I'll pass yet another law with another promulgation, and you're going to be dead meat. So that's what I want to emphasize here, that he's a man of law. Now understand, law can be And it usually is a wonderful thing, because without law, you have chaos, you have anarchy. The flip side, though, is that law can be used in terrible ways. And after all, the Soviet Union is a land of law. They had judges, and when Stalin did his purges, he would have his people go, and the secret police, the NKVD, the predecessors to the KGB, would arrest people at midnight, and the people would be put on trial. Nobody was shot in their homes. All the Jews whom Stalin killed, murdered, and all the others whom Stalin murdered, which were not only anti-communists, but much, much more typically members of the Communist Party and even the Politburo, whom he wanted to eliminate, he would have them arrested. If you've ever read Darkness at Noon by Arthur Kessler, he would have them arrested, put in prison, and then put on trial. If you ever watched the TV show, it was a series, it was very good, The Americans. There was an episode where this woman was arrested and put on trial. I'll leave it at that in case you haven't seen it, but it's always good to see. Anyway, so he would have a trial, and he would have judges, and they would apply the law, and under the law, the accused might be found guilty, and then he would allow them an appeal as per the law, and their appeal would be held 5 minutes later, not like in the United States where you appeal from the California Superior Court, and your appeal is heard a year later, where you appeal from a federal district court, and it's heard a year later, and then the Supreme Court gets to it a year or two after that. He would have very, very convenient, very, very efficient. Your appeal would be heard 10 minutes later by a different panel. They would affirm the lower court holding. You even got a third appeal to the Soviet Supreme Court, and within 2 hours, you were dead, all according to the law. And that's what they do now in Iran. It's all law. So the fact that someone's a stickler for the law doesn't, it depends what the law is. If the law is unjust and evil, so you got a problem. Okay. So he now has called in Vashti. And I want to emphasize again, as the Talmud emphasizes, the Gemara picks up on it, that this happens by Yom HaShvi'i. It's the 187th day. It is the last day of the celebration. Why is it on that day, Yom HaShvi'i? For us as Jews, those of us who have a little more experience, even if we don't speak Hebrew, even if we are challenged reading Hebrew, it may resonate in your ear, that expression, Yom HaShvi'i. That's how we begin Kiddush. Vayhi erev vayvoker Yom HaShvi'i, vayechulu hashamayim va'aretz, b'chol tzva'am, vayechal Elokim b'Yom HaShvi'i, melachto asher asa, vayishbot b'Yom HaShvi'i, mikol melachto asher asa, vayavarech Elokim et Yom HaShvi'i, vayakadesh oto, kivo shavat mikol melachto, asher bara Elokim la'asot. Yom HaShvi'i in the Jewish ear reminds us of Shabbat. And there's hidden in that message that something happened particularly on Shabbat, and why Dafka specifically does this fall on Shabbat. Partly, as I said, this is God's thumbprint, that a miracle is taking place, and partly he is punishing Vashti, the queen, specifically Dafka on Shabbat, because the Talmud tells us, and it's in the Midrash, that it's, I think, maybe page 13a, some within a folio. As you see, the folio goes on a long time. So it's a long page of folio. So anyway, the Talmud tells us that it was her way as queen that she forced, specifically, she forced her Jewish maids and servants to work extra hard on the Jewish Sabbath, contemptuous of the Jewish Sabbath. This is, of course, before Muslims. Muslims begin in the 600s. This is way before that, 1,000 years earlier, give or take. It's before Christianity. And their religion in those days was was the Persian religion. She happens to come from Babylonian and Chaldean roots. Nebuchadnezzar, we said Nebuchadnezzar either is, according to those who say that King Belshazzar was Evil Merodach's brother, that makes her the granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. According to those who say that Belshazzar was Evil Merodach's son, that makes her the great-granddaughter of Nebuchadnezzar. She grows up as a Persian, as a Babylonian, Chaldean. She herself does not have the throne by that virtue. Rather, she marries the guy who was the chief stable boy under Nebuchadnezzar, namely Achashverosh. And he, a Persian, rises to be king. By marrying her, he, a stable boy, gains more legitimacy by having a wife of royalty who stems from a royal marriage, sort of like Henry II marrying Catherine of Aragon or whatever, if you've ever seen the movie Lion in Winter. So he's married to the daughter of like Isabella and Ferdinand. It gives him more legitimacy being married to the daughter of the King and Queen of Spain. So in the same way, that's Henry II. That's Henry II. So in the same way, well, was it Henry II? No, that's Henry II before, right? That's before Henry VIII. Henry VIII was married to the daughter of Spain's Ferdinand and Isabella. Henry II was married to the one Eleanor of Aquitaine. There you go. Or the other way around, whatever. So anyway, they both married queens, that is princesses from the daughters of other kings and queens, to establish their greater royalty. So here is a stable boy, and he's, as stable boys go, he's quite unstable. And he wisely decides to marry into royalty. Okay, so it talks about on Yom HaShvi'i, the idea that what's going on with her as we get to page 12b and 13a. So what goes on with her is that she forced her Jewish servants to work on Shabbat, and she forced them to work naked. And this is part of what we understand. And let's see how let's see how the Gemara says it. I'm just about at the spot, I think, on 13a. And then we'll go back, and here we go. Let's see if I don't find it in a moment, but I probably will. Let's see. Okay. Let's get it. All right. Come on. So I'm not finding, but take it from me. It'll be 13a. And it talks about why she was punished by Yom HaShvi'i. Just give me one. Well, all right. I'm sorry. Just take me one more second, and otherwise I'll just skip it, because I'd like you to see it in the Talmudic text at 13a or 12b. I know you don't suspect that I'm making it up and that the text, but let's see, it's going to be right around it. And if I don't find it, I don't find it. Okay, that's all. So let's go forward. The Talmud tells us that she made it her business to torture her Jewish servants. There we go. Okay. Shebamida she'adam moded, bama modedin lo. We have a concept in Judaism of measure for measure. God rewards measure for measure. God punishes measure for measure. For example, the Pharaoh of Egypt during the Haggadah storyline ordered that all Jewish children, boys, be drowned. That was his order. How did God punish him? Ultimately, his army was drowned in the Red Sea, the Sea of Reeds. The Pharaoh ordered specifically all boys be killed, not the girls. Consequently, it was the males, the army, who died drowning, and likewise, during the 10th plague, the firstborn sons, not the daughters. So there are many examples. I'll skip most of them, time-wise. and he rewards likewise measure for measure. An example, sticking with the same overall example, when the mother took baby Moshe Rabbeinu, wasn't our Rabbeinu yet, he wasn't our teacher Moses, he was little baby Moses, he didn't even have a name yet. When the mother took the little baby, put the baby into the basket, lined it with tar and pitch so that it would not sink while it's floating on the Nile, and then instructed his sister, her daughter, Miriam, stick with the basket, see what becomes of this basket case. So Miriam stuck with the basket and therefore was able to come back to mom and tell mom, you'll never believe who just picked up our brother, our son, the princess of Egypt. And by virtue of that, the mother knew to go to the princess and offer herself as the midwife, as the wet nurse who could feed the baby. And thus Moshe Rabbeinu suckled on his mother's milk and grew up in his early years with his mother. And there's all kinds of ramifications to that. So later in time, decades later, the story will unfold where Miriam speaks unpleasantly about Moshe's marriage to Tzipporah, the daughter of a Midianite priest. And it speaks about, she spoke Lashon Hara, slander about the Moshe Tzipporah marriage, and God punished her that Miriam had biblical leprosy. The nation was supposed to continue marching forward in the desert towards the promised land. However, they waited 7 days and did not proceed until her leprosy passed. The rabbis point out she waited patiently, watching that basket of that little baby boy, and did not let the basket leave her sight. In reward, measure for measure, decades later, an entire nation waited for her. So the idea of midah keneged midah is very core in Judaism. You are rewarded for good things you've done. And just as with Miriam, it might be 30 years later. You might say, I did this thing that really was a cut above. I'm not full of myself. I'm not patting myself on the back, but looking back, I did this really good thing and I've never been rewarded midah keneged midah. Well, just wait 30, 40, 50 years. But God repays measure for measure. And on the other side of the aisle, unfortunately, sometimes the sin that someone does eventually is repaid measure for measure. It happens. When people look and they see the, let's say the Don, the Teflon Don of the mafia, and they say, I don't get it. Why does he have such a good life? You don't know what's going on inside his life. You don't know he's getting. So you had that mafia guy who for years and years was walking around with his dapper suits and they couldn't touch him. They couldn't prove anything on him. And he was known as the Teflon Don because they couldn't make anything stick. But he ended up, eventually they got him. It took a while. And he ended up dying in prison. And as Dons go, he came out good because most of them normally get shot to death while they're eating spaghetti and tomato sauce in an Italian restaurant with a little bib on at their necks, like Carmen Galante and Vinny, anybody with the name Vinny. So in the same way, you have this now. Shebamida sha'adam modeh, ba modedin lo. The way a person acts, that's measure for measure how he is treated or she. Malamed shahayata Vashti Horasha'a Miviyah Benot Yisrael. Vashti, the evil Vashti, would take Jewish women, she would take daughters of Israel, umafshitatan arumot, and she would make them strip naked. She did not require that of her non-Jewish mates. She had a unique contempt for Jews because we are the chosen nation. And she had to cut us down a notch, she felt. V'osa bahen melacha b'Shabbat. and she would force them to work, specifically on Saturday. Many of you probably, as I have, in a lifetime have encountered non-Jews who've been unusually respectful of our Shabbat. I remember when I practiced law for 10 years, Jones Day, Aiken Gump, they were deeply respectful of Shabbat. There was a particular partner. There was one time I had a nightmare partner that my first year had to work for too often, Dan McClune. He was the worst of the worst. Even he would not force me to work on Shabbat. I've told you the story many times, don't want to waste your time now. But he once assigned me something, and he would not let me out of that office until like a half an hour before candlelighting. And that did not leave me enough time to get home to the San Fernando Valley, which is where I lived then, in time for Shabbat. So I had to stay at the Jones Day office all of Shabbat. I stopped working before candlelighting, but I couldn't get home in time. And the only question was, am I going to take like a hotel room across the street? And I was so close to Shabbat, I felt I'm stuck here for Shabbat. And there was another partner there, actually of counsel, not a partner, named Dave Zucker. And Dave Zucker, it's interesting. His name is Dave Zucker, and he married someone named Deborah, also like a name that sounds Jewish. And they're both Germans, non-Jews. And Dave Zucker was walking by, saw the light on in my office. I didn't turn off the light. I was reading, davening. I had a sitter there. I had my shop. I always had my Taliesin to fill in there also, a second set. And he walks in and he says, Dov, what are you doing here? I explained to him, McClune wouldn't let me out. And he said, what are you going to do? I said, I'm stuck here for Shabbat, my Sabbath. He said, do you have food? I don't have any food here. He said, what should I get? And I said, Dave, don't stop. He actually went, and he went to a nearby Ralph's or Albertsons. He went to the Jewish aisle. He bought me what he assumed was Jewish food, the most disgusting thing that no Jew would actually eat. Bought me a can of that Lekvar prune butter. Bought me a can or two of Telma canned tahina, which is the worst of the worst. And he bought a can opener because he knew from something past, I must have said to him that I can't open a can on Shabbat. So I remember he showed up with that. He showed up with two little rolls, because there's no kosher certified rolls. There are, but you have to know what to look for, like Ezekiel bread, or there's one or two brands that are kosher. So I remember he brought me 2 bagels because he figured a bagel's kosher. That's by definition kosher. So anyway, I remember. So there are non-Jews. In fact, it changed. I have to say, it changed my attitude towards Germans. Till Dave Zucker, I would not fraternize with any Germans who are non-Jewish. If you've ever met German Jews, I didn't fraternize with them either. But I wouldn't even buy liquid paper because it's made in Germany. I'd only buy American-made paper. There are Americans who don't buy stuff made in China. I don't buy stuff made in Germany. A guy once offered me a lift somewhere. He's driving a Volkswagen. I wouldn't take the lift. I won't go into a German car. Jackie Mason, you've all heard during the Hanukkah thing, how he does a routine about all the Jews in Beverly Hills who can't afford a Mercedes or a BMW say, well, I wouldn't buy a German car. So anyway, here what you have, Dave, like many of us have encountered, non-Jews who are very kind and respectful when they learn that you're an Orthodox Jew who observes Shabbat, they will go the extra yard to respect your Shabbat. The worst problems we normally run into, even Dan McClune, he kept me in the office, but he stopped before candlelighting, whether it was out of respect for my Judaism or not wanting to get stuck in a litigation with a litigator. But the worst problems we have, and I have this as a rabbi when people contact me, come from Jews who say, I don't keep Shabbat, you're not eating, I need to take off 2 days for this holiday or that holiday. And and the Jewish boss says, you ain't going to pull that on me. I'll give you 1 day Rosh Hashanah, or I'll give you 1 day, I'm not giving you Shmini. What are you talking about? So the worst problems are with the Jews. With the non-Jews, they don't mess around, either out of respect or they don't want to get involved. Okay. But this is the queen of the country. She is answered no. She answers to no one, although we now find out she answers to her husband. So God, Kashem Sha'asata, Kach Nizar Aleha, the way that she behaved, just as she had done with the young Jewish women, so it was decreed upon her. So that's the importance of why it talks about Yom HaShvi'i. And what does it mean when it says that the drinking was done religiously? So it says in the text that he ordered on the 7th day, Ketov Lev HaMelech B'Yayim. His heart was filled with wine. So what's going on here? He's a drinker. For 186 days, there's been wine, and he's been drinking with everybody else. Hashtiyah Kadat. In fact, he made a law. Today we've been talking about him in law. He made a law that drinking wine should be available in plenty, but ein ones. No one is to be forced to drink wine or to drink wine of a particular varietal that they don't want. It should be that super duper. La'asot kertzoni sh'ish. Everyone should be given particularly as much wine as they want and only the wine they want. So, for example, the Talmud spells it out. Talmud says, for example, that if people came from a certain let's say you're French, and you get this thing in your head that there's no wine like French wine. So you just have Bordeaux, not a Bordeaux that's grown outside, but you can have your own Bordeaux. Amar Rabbi Elazar, Melamed shekol echad v'echad hishkahu meyein medinato. Each was poured wine of his own country. There really are those, I don't know how you could say that I'm from Chile and I specifically want a Chile wine. Maybe you want a chilled wine. But, there are French who it must be from the Bordeaux, or it must be the Cabernet, not the Cabernet from the Sonoma. So anyway, it was from wherever you wanted. And if you're a Californian and you want it from Sonoma, or you want it from some other valley, wherever you want, l'rtzon k'ish for ish. In the same way, just as much as you wanted, he made it a law, and they pick up likewise. What is the deal with Vashti's party taking place in a separate palace? Why? I mean, this is not like Orthodox. We have a mechitza separating men and women. So why was her women's party not in the same palace, but in a separate palace, a separate section in the Beit HaMalchut? Because her point was she also was a person of great prestige, and she was in her own section. Okay. So as we start wrapping up for today, about another 10 minutes or so, finishing chapter 1 and plumbing out of it all this text that we never pick up when we're going to shul for a Megillah reading, because we're reading so quickly that we just don't have time to go through everything. And even if you follow the translation, you don't pick up the stuff. So anyway, she's got her party going on, and it's the 7th day, and he's drunk too much. And as a result of that, he gets the idea, actually, get into an argument. Which women are the most beautiful women in the world? It's not a thing rabbis get into. I could tell you 40 years since I was ordained in March 81, I've never sat with rabbis in a debate which women are the most beautiful. But Denise and I were watching, I shouldn't say it, it's being recorded, but I'm addicted to Curb Your Enthusiasm. What can I do? So Denise and I were watching an episode of Curb Your Enthusiasm where Larry gets into an argument with his Uber driver as to whether Romanian women are the most beautiful women in the world. And it turns into, like everything, he says the wrong thing and it starts a whole thing. And all right. People get into these stupid discussions. And believe me, I was privy to many of them when I practiced law. That's a whole, you ain't lived, and good for you. You've been a rabbi for 10 years. I'm raised in an Orthodox home, Orthodox parents, an Orthodox lifestyle, modern Orthodox. And I go to only yeshivas. So I only know from Orthodox and from Jews. 8 grades, elementary school, 4 years high school. First time I ever really got to meet a goy was college when I went to Columbia. That's how I met non-Jews. And then when I went to UCLA for law school. But my life is basically with Jews. And I don't know from goyim. You read about goyim. You watch them in the movies. Suddenly I'm practicing law and non-Jews invite me to join them for lunch. Okay, they're eating pork and ham and bacon and whatever they're having. I'm getting fruit salads. And I learned even fruit salad because they go to 5-star restaurants. You're working at Jones Day, Aiken Gump. For what you're getting paid, you don't go to Panda. You go to a 5-star restaurant. And when you sit at a 5-star restaurant and they're going to charge you $30 for a fruit salad, they just don't have the heart in the kitchen to simply give you watermelon, cantaloupe, and honeydew. So my first fruit salad at a non-kosher restaurant, he's throwing shrimp in the salad. I'm looking at this little things that's not a melon. That's not pineapple. That doesn't look like blueberries either. And I have to ask the waiter, what is this? And he explains this is this and this is that. And so that was even my education on fruit salads. Eventually, I spoke with the chef and we worked it out long term. And then we would have lunch together, I with 4 or 5 of my colleagues. And all they would talk about is sex. It's quite different an experience for me as a rabbi. There I'm a lawyer. I'm one of the guys. I have a yarmulke. And all they would talk about is sex. And they would have discussions that make Me Too look like Me 3. You have no idea some of the disgusting things they would talk about. When they're all guys in public, Me Too, Me Too. Non-binary gender. In private, the biggest misogynist sexists, when you get them with the where they think it's safe. And it's safe because everything they're saying is attorney-client protected. All right. So he gets the idea to invite Vashti. And what's happening is, according to the Gemara, it was his advisors. They saw he was stone drunk and that he's arguing that the most beautiful women in the world are Chaldeans or Chaldeans. I don't know if you pronounce CH, Babylonians. And the rest of them are all Persians and Medians. And they're saying you have no idea. And he says, to prove it, I'll bring her in naked. Because truth to tell, the advisors say it's not fair otherwise, because she's going to wear the most beautiful clothes. Like, for example, have you ever seen a public during the 4 years that Trump was president? Did you ever see a photograph of Melania where she wasn't dressed lovely? So for all you know, Melania could be the ugliest woman in America. And as a rabbi, I'm not going to give my opinion of her personal appearance, but I could tell you, it's very clear Melania was always dressed to the nines, always dressed very tastefully and very, very nice. So they're saying, you're going to bring her out, she's going to be dressed like Melania. So to compare her beauty to that of an average Median or Persian woman, you can't get a fair read. The only fair way to read is have her come without any clothes. And then we could compare her to a Persian and a Median. Okay. So the Gemara discusses it. And under that kind of an argument, he goes ahead with it. Vatama ein malka Vashti, and she refuses. And that's why it says she refused to come at the king's command conveyed by the eunuchs. And what I taught you 2 weeks ago was orally, and it wasn't in the text. So let's see if it's in the text. So what happens is he says, look, the argument's going as follows. And this is where I came up with it. From the advanced text of the Talmud, folio 12b. At the feast of that wicked man, and you'll notice they refer to him regularly in the Talmud, because the Talmud doesn't have to go through Persian censorship. They refer to him regularly as the wicked man, Oto Russia. If you ever heard the term Russia, not as a nation of near the Ukraine that's going to invade the Ukraine, but Russia, an evil person, Rishayim. So at the feast of that wicked man, they don't even refer to him by his name, Achashverosh. He's understood to be evil. So some said Median women are more beautiful. Others said Persian are more beautiful. He said the vessel that I use, that's how he referred to his wife. That which is boldface is the literal translation to the degree that it's correct or incorrect. That which is non-boldface is extra words they throw in for context. The vessel that I use is neither. So he decides to have her brought in, yada, yada. And in fact, the Talmud says there's one opinion that she was so immodest, she didn't even mind initially showing up naked. But because of the sin of how she had treated her Jewish maids, forcing them over the years to work naked, she broke out in body leprosy. At the last moment, she became a leper. And suddenly, instead of deciding, I'll show off my naked body, became obsessed with keeping it clothed. And eventually, his anger burned in him. And why did it burn in him? Again, the censorship, they could not put it in the main text of the Megillah, but was handed down to us through the centuries from Esther and Mordechai, and continues in the Midrash and the Talmud, that she sent him a handwritten note. You, the son of my father's stableman. My father could drink against 1,000 men and did not become inebriated. And you can't hold your whiskey or your alcohol. And this was read to him in the presence of his cabinet. That's what blew him up, the public embarrassment. When I taught it before, this is in the Talmud, when I gave you the initial overview. So he asks, and notice who's last among the seven. They are listed in order of primacy. His seven are Karshana, Shetar, Admata, Tarshish, Meres, Marsana, and the seventh is Memuchan. These are the seven cabinet officers from Persia and Media. The last of the seven is Memuchan. According to the Midrash, the Talmud, Memuchan was Haman. And they explain why the name Haman does not appear initially. But Memuchan is the least of them. Look, he's still an important guy. The Vayomer Memuchan, Tana Memuchan, Zehaman. Memuchan is Haman. And it goes into why it's called Muchan. So anyway, they bring out, look, if you're the seventh of the seven cabinet ministers, it's like the United States cabinet. So the main cabinet ministers or secretaries are Secretary of Defense, Secretary of the Treasury, Secretary of State, people like Blinken. By contrast, who's a lesser secretary? I don't know. Depends on if I were in Nebraska, I'd say otherwise, but maybe the Secretary of Agriculture is a lower ranking secretary. So Memuchan is lower ranking. And this was Memuchan's big opportunity. He saw this as an opportunity. Two things going on here. Number one, it's an opportunity to stand out and to rise higher in the king's eyes among the seven. But on the second level, it also reflects a sort of lack of impolitic, a lack of prudence. You see the king is burning angry. And to suggest while he's burning angry, we're drunk, let's have your wife come out naked. You may suddenly rise to the most clever, insightful of all the 7. But when that guy sobers up, it's just not going to end well. And that's part of the message she sends. In the first, according to the Talmud, because we're running out of time now, I won't continue reading from the Gemara. But according to the Gemara, there actually were 3 rounds. The Megillah talks about 1 round. He called for her to show up. She said, I'm not coming. He got furious and said, what should I do? And he was told, kill her. And a lot of that is from the Talmud. But according to Talmud, there were 3 rounds. In her first response, she was not as blatant as to say, you can't hold your whiskey while my father or grandfather could drink 1,000 glasses of wine. Her first response was, you don't want me showing up naked because it works bad either way. If I show up and you've got everybody looking and seeing that I truly am mirror, mirror on the wall, the fairest lady of them all, you're increasing the possibility that one of them is going to try to kill you in order to get me. Like in Hamlet, in order to get the queen, you got to get rid of the king. So they're going to have to kill you to get the Nate. You don't want that. And even if they don't kill you, someone's liable to rape me after seeing what I look like naked. And that's if they like what they see. And if they don't like what they see, you're going to be a laughingstock. They're going to say, that's the most beautiful. You think that's the most beautiful woman in the kingdom? That's your queen? You, the number one who could have anyone, that's what you're with? So she tried initially to say, it's just not going to work either way. And he comes back and says, I said, I want you to show up. And then by the 3rd time, she's insulting the kishkas out of him and everything else. So what's happening here is that Momuchan, Haman, in suggesting this, is taking an incredible risk, but he's not wise enough. A wise person tries to advance, but prudently. So we see he's not prudent. And when he later gets the order from the king, the promulgation, to kill out the Jews, again, that's very risky. As long as the king remains your national anti-Semite number 1, your Hitler, or something close to it, Stalin. Maybe Stalin was a bigger anti-Semite than Hitler, only Hitler was better organized with his machinery, his German machinery. You're taking a chance. If you're dealing with someone who's truly so internalized as an anti-Semite, maybe it'll help you be an Eichmann. But on the other hand, if this guy does not have anti-Semitism in his blood and his bones, then if he changes his mind later, it's going to be, who's the moron that got me thinking I should kill out the Jews? And indeed, that's what's going to kill Haman in the end. And by the way, you may remember, because again, so very many of us, a few of us are not experienced with Megillah. And what you're learning is the whole story, the whole Megillah from the beginning. But many of us have heard the story 30 years in a row, and we know the story. So I'm making reference to the fact that a lot of you know how some of the story goes. You'll recall that part of Haman's downfall is that when Esther has that second party at which she tells the king he wants to kill all of my people and reveals her identity and her national origins, you'll remember that the king stalks out to the balcony in a blaze of anger, and he's under inebriation again. Haman, knowing that he's in trouble, races up to the queen, who's sitting on like a chaise lounge, and while he's begging her for his life, he falls on her. And just at that moment, the king walks in and sees Haman has fallen on her. And because the king is drunk, really drunk and furious, when he sees Haman having slipped and fallen on the queen, but not having seen that it was an accident, The rabbis tell us it pulls back to his memory this incident we're talking about today, where he had been warned in the first of the three responsive messages from Vashti that if I show up naked one of these days, one of your advisors is going to try to rape me. And the king walks in, sees Haman, the one who had suggested she show up naked, and he's on top of her, apparently raping her. And in his mind, she was right. It all comes back to him. She was right. He regrets having her killed. When we go forward next week with chapter 2, having finished our intense discussion of chapter 1 and moving on with the story, understand it's not going to say it in the text, only by hint, because it's got to get through the censorship. But he regrets to his dying day that he had Vashti killed. He loves Esther. He can have more than one wife, polyester. But he regrets to his dying day that he had Vashti killed. And he takes it out on Haman. When he sees Haman trying to rape, in his mind, Haman's not trying to rape anybody. Haman's begging for his life. When he sees Haman having fallen on Esther, bringing back to his memory how Vashti had warned him way back when, you don't want to do this. It's going to lead to someone who, it causes rape. Rape causes recollection. And it says, and with this I'll finish, it says he orders, if you recall, he orders that Haman should be killed. And it says, after then Charvona tells him that, Haman set up a gallows with which to kill Mordechai. And he says, Taluhu alav, so hang him on it. And then what does it say? It says that after the hanging of Haman, it says that the king's anger, when the king got the word back that they've now hanged Haman, it says that Vayetlu et Haman, they hanged. It's not impaled is a bad translation. They hanged Haman al ha'etz. They hanged him on the tree. Bad translation. They did not impale him at the stake. The tree that he prepared to hang Mordechai. And then it says, Vachamat hamelech shachacha. The king's anger was not just abated, but shachach, forgotten. That is when the king finally made his peace with the death of Vashti and his having ordered Vashti's execution. With the man who had recommended the execution, who had recommended she show up naked, who had started this whole thing, with that man's ultimate hanging, he finally felt Vashti had been avenged. He never saw, King Ahasuerus never saw personal responsibility in having ordered her to show up naked and then having ordered her to be executed for refusing his order after she sent the angry letter. Rather, he always blamed Haman. Had you not suggested when I was at the peak of drunkenness to call her out in that state, none of this would have happened. So he blamed him until he had him killed. And why didn't he have him killed sooner? Because, to bring full cycle to the beginning of class, he was a stickler on the law. Someone who tries to rape the queen gets killed. That's the law. I'll take in it. First, let me stop the recording for the day.